one of the things that was amazing to be able to watch being around all of these, what I consider now would be defined as the forefathers of fitness or fitness coaching. I think I got to see success take as many different forms and people gain an audience through many different ways. And I was able to look at, okay, how do they do it? Would that be sustainable for me? Would that make me happy? Would that be fulfilling for me? I had to find ways that were workable for me.
Everybody, my interview with Ben Esgro was extremely fun because it was a time for me to catch up with an old friend. I think you're going to get that loud and clear as you listen to our chat. But one of the things that always attracted me to Ben in the first place was his brilliant analytical science mind. As somebody who really does enjoy the biochemistry and the organic chemistry side of this sport. Somebody who very much got involved, as many of us do, in sports supplement science. There always seems to be a voice or two in the industry that is bringing forward all of the new findings and highlighting research and so forth in the sports supplement side. And rightly so, these kinds of agents can be helpful and supportive, but they're not the main thing, hence the term supplement. But just to see that Ben is still involved in that passion, something that brought him into this industry more than a decade ago, was fantastic to hear. Some really cool parallels between our careers as we've moved along. We have not seen each other in person for almost a decade. He and I spoke together at different science conferences and camps in the past. And as he says in one point, he's accused of flying under the radar, not a big extrovert, much similar to me. And so this was a chance for both of us to just share some of our history together and see what we've been up to in the past. And I really think you're going to see some cool things in terms of where our nutrition coaching industry started, at least in that tiny epic of time. And some of those tentacles, I keep likening the history of our academic profession, our occupation, to convergent and divergent evolution, where there's an intermixing and just parts of the family tree interweave. And this is still in that main pod where I coached Lane, and then Lane created quite a following, and everybody seemed to orbit him for quite a while. And this was a very early beginning in those days. So really think you're going to enjoy it. I want you to check out what Ben is doing outside of this. So check out those show notes for his websites. And I hope you enjoy our conversation. Ben Esgro. So Ben Esgro, just for a little bit of framing, you and I met for the first time probably around a decade ago, and then we crossed paths for a couple years. And that intersection was originally, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, through Lane Norton. So I was invited to speak at a couple of his VIP camps down in Florida. Then you and I were both on a trip together with him overseas. So I think we go back close to a decade, probably almost right around that time.
Yeah, it's been a bit, but I'd say long overdue. But that was the beginning. I mean, I had known of you prior, back from the Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness magazine days and your articles, and obviously before there was Lane, there was you. So I knew who you were, but that was the first way I think I got connected to a lot of people I had known and looked up to in fitness, but actually got to meet and interact with for the first time. So definitely I owe a lot of credit to Lane for that, because he got me out of my extremely introverted shell.
Well, and let's talk about that for a second, because what I really want to do, I had an immediate affinity and kinship for you because you're a registered dietitian. You take nutrition very seriously. And even though we met about 10 years ago, my beginnings formally were probably closer to 25, 28 years ago. And I felt kind of alone in the world, in that here was this bodybuilding world, and I was trying to sort things out and make better paths forward into evidence-based practices and all the things that you see in the bodybuilding field now that spilled over into general population work that I was doing. But there wasn't a lot of people doing that. And technically at the time, I understood that I was not an RD nor an MD. So even with a clinical doctorate in nutrition, I was pretty limited in my scope and what I could do. And when I decided to start creating avenues for people to get involved, I knew I had to abide by the laws. And looking at all 50 states, because they were all legislated differently, it was clear that if I employ an RD and or an MD, and they're looking over our shoulders, so to speak, and our processes and what we do, then we could create a licensing or franchising model. And that's what I was doing. And it seemed like that was the only path forward. And when I met you, I would say because of Lane, nutrition coaching really in mass just kind of flourished when everybody started ignoring those laws, and still to this day. So I'm interested. Let's take this in two steps. First, what made you decide to become a registered dietitian to begin with?
Well, it actually wasn't, I'd say, the primary path of choice. So what happened was I knew I always wanted to go to school for nutrition pretty early on, because I think that was, I apologize for having to rewind it a little bit, but there is a little background sort of required to answer that question. So once I got it like really into fitness and bodybuilding and wanting to change body comp, I think nutrition was the thing that people, you'd always get those principles or sayings that people would say, like, nutrition's 80% of it, and training's 20, and all that stuff. And so I think that was very early ingrained into me. And then when I first started trying to change my body comp, I really realized the power of nutrition, because it went first from a place of like essentially starvation diet, then to getting really skinny and realizing, oh, okay, like I need to eat something, so I need to build some kind of structure from there. And I think just the amount of control over physiology with nutrition was just very fascinating from the beginning for me. And I think that really has forayed into multiple fields now beyond just nutrition from the start. But I knew I wanted to go to school, to undergrad, for nutrition because of that. I was just addicted as soon as I realized, like, wow, I can control my body composition. And it's pretty unbelievable what you can do to your body physically just by changing your eating patterns. So I did that. I did the formal nutrition route, and I think a lot of it was, I'd say for the most part, disappointing for me curriculum wise, because you go to school for nutritional science, and it wasn't as much science as I think I was expecting. And the courses that I loved were like, the biochems, the nutritional, I think it was Nutrition 303, where you talk about, macronutrients and the roles of macronutrients and basically how they impact physiology and clinical nutrition. And that's the stuff that really, really gave me more of what I was looking for. And a lot of the other classes, let's just say, weren't, that are part of the requirement of, doing an accredited program in nutrition. So I graduated, and I was looking for jobs, and the first job I got out of school was with WIC. And for anybody who's not familiar, WIC stands for Women, Infants, Children. It's basically a government provided food service program that, from my experience, is underutilized and I think underappreciated, because you can qualify either based on medical need or income. And oftentimes people who are within this service are not actually utilizing the program to its full benefit, because you do get food checks, but you're getting free nutrition counseling. So people would get an hour with me, 30 minutes to an hour with me. And really the end point for, I'd say, 95% of people was, just give me the checks. I don't really care what you have to say, which was crazy, because at that time I had clients who I was working with for nutrition or fitness stuff, and they were paying me like significant amounts of money, yet people who were getting it for free were not appreciating it or utilizing it at all. So anyway, I worked that job for 2 years. I'll keep it brief and just say that is not what I wanted my career path to be. And I knew to have any type of fallback or really forward momentum in getting out of that career path as a nutritionist or dietitian, I needed an RD. It's sort of like the gateway thing to get into any type of better paying or more respected, I think, positions in nutrition. So originally I didn't actually intend on getting the RD, and then I did it after I went out and worked in the field for a little bit and realized like my hands were very tied if I didn't have it.
So that initial movement just into a bachelor's degree, was that because of your interest in physique sport? Like I'm interested in this and I want to be the best version of that I can be. And there's got to be some way to make an occupation out of this, but it's primarily for that passion.
Yeah, I mean, passion really drives pretty much all of my life decisions of what I'm going to pursue. And it was the passion of kind of talking the talk, but being able to walk the walk. And I think one of the fascinating things, and this is the irony on the other side, the flip side of, you talked about all of the legal and legislation things about nutrition, how technically you're not really supposed to be writing nutrition plans and diet plans without the RD. But the irony is a lot of people I went to school with, I don't think they had ever been on a formalized, I'm not going to say, well, diet is the easy way to say it, but that's sort of taboo to use it that way. But they haven't really done body composition, nutrition plans themselves before. So I found that really crazy, is how many people in this field have actually had the experience of, changing their body comp significantly in some type of controlled manner. Yet the end point of this degree is supposed to be for that. You're supposed to be the nutrition expert. So I found that really, really ironic. And I thought, not just because I was a male in a female dominated field, but the fact that I already had that practical experience of going through it was definitely sort of an advantage.
Well, and that leads me to the point where I think you and I conceptually intersect well, because I, again, fashioned my business around those legal limitations.
Mm-hmm.
And you, I think it's very appropriate and cliche in a very fun way that you started working in something like WIC. And isn't that what most people think of when you hear the term registered dietitian? You're going to work in a school or a hospital or a
Yeah.
government program like that.
Yeah.
And totally fine. But what I like to tell young people today looking at coaching or fitness as a career, how much entrepreneurial domination there is. Like, there aren't that many jobs out there. You for the most part create your own.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do have the passion and you do have the drive, there are building blocks that can lead you into better pastures. But that's where also there's the layering of credibility and real world knowledge. You're actually learning something academically, and yet then you get that competitive advantage. And so you at that point said, okay, I need an RD. I need that accreditation to make sure that I can legally do this and it's going to do good things for my career. Once you went down that road, did you immediately jump into the fitness world full force? How did that path present itself?
Yeah, at that time, I mean, it's crazy. The most popular social media platform was bodybuilding.com forums. It wasn't, there was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, there was no TikTok. So I think a lot of my education was a mix of both in the classroom and really digging at that point in time within the community. So I'd say I was involved. I don't think I formally started taking clients, like paying clients, until it was around the WIC period of time, I think. But I had known, because of my experience, like Lane was my first coach for a bodybuilding show. I knew that I saw the potency and the ability to really change someone's life through that. So I think it was always something I knew that I wanted to somehow be involved in doing. And to be honest, like, it never was really an intentional career choice. I think it just sort of happened. Like, I remember I prepped, and then at the local gym, like, there were other bodybuilders prepping and stuff, and they'd start asking nutrition questions, and then it just became this thing through conversation. And like, I'd take one person, I'd help them, and I started having success. And then obviously the networks start growing, and you start, just taking one or two clients who are somewhat significant in terms of like being known. And then it's amazing. It just kind of balloons from there. But I think, to get back sort of to the point, I think it comes down to a personal preference thing where I wanted to feel more comfortable and confident in knowing that I'm giving people something that I could back up beyond just like these are nutritional beliefs that have been passed down over time. I wanted something a little more solid than that, and I think I did get a lot of that. That's why I followed who I followed. That's how I became, associated with Lane. That's how I got connected with you. I think the evidence-based aspect of fitness was always the most appealing part to me, and I think that's what made me. I think you can have with many of these things very positive and negative paths you can go down. Like, for example, if you got lost in one subsection of bodybuilding.com forums that was like the MISC or the IFBB section, maybe that would guide your life path. But I think the one that always spoke to me was the evidence-based one, the people who were backing up what they were saying, not just like, if you want 18-inch arms, you need to do curls because that's just the way it is, bro. You know what I mean? Or I like, that's how my body works. That's how, you know what I mean? Like, just typical gym beliefs. So, yeah, that's sort of what drove, I think, my decisions, and what made me say I'm probably going to stay in this space, because I think there will always be a need for that. Because think of it, you mentioned marketing, you mentioned entrepreneurial aspects. I think there's also a lot of aspects of fitness where people are seen as easy prey, because there's still so much belief in it. And like, Lane has built a career on belief wars. So I think it's just valid. It's proof that no matter how many educated people come into the space, it has not totally changed the industry.
Well, that's why I wanted to do this series. I feel like we're now almost a full generation past that etiology point. And, this sphere of people, from me, Lane, Paul Ravella, you, Ryan Doris. I mean, think of all of these people. That crowd was almost the Venice Beach of what you're calling evidence-based,
totally.
Movement. And I guess I didn't view it as that at the time. I was just doing my thing. I wouldn't have even called it real science-based. That was my platform. That was my background. But it was just to find the better ways of doing things, the processes for people, for their real lives, for their health, for their performance. And of course, like minds congeal together. We end up with this group. And I think at the time you were doing some bodybuilding and powerlifting. Is that right? Personally? And then because of that need or that attraction for an evidence-based community, you, for a while, you moved to Florida, didn't you?
I did. Yep. Yeah. So I don't even remember what year that was, but it was at some point close after, probably 2016.
Mm-hmm. And I'm putting these pieces together myself as we go. So I apologize for not, having an exact timeline. But you and Ryan Doris, De Novo Nutrition, you as a powerlifting coach, you as a nutrition coach, you had a lot of things going, and I would call it almost spokes in a wheel that were carrying you down the road. Quite literally. I remember you and Ryan doing this cross-country social media campaign with De Novo Nutrition. So kind of go through that 2 or 3 year history of what tangible decisions did you make for your career, and how far did that carry you at that time?
Yeah. So like I said, I sort of fell into coaching. I think really the original intent was the supplement side of things, and it's for all the same reasons that I kind of talked about for quite a bit there, which is just this real intrigue by physiology. And I think the aspect of supplements, again, like, there's a Jekyll and Hyde aspect to the supplement industry. And I think the interesting part for me was that, when you have things like creatines and the ingredients that broke through, and actually did work and do something, I think that always, lit up a fascination in my mind that, okay, there are legitimate ingredients. You just need to work to find them, because it's usually somebody digging and excavating through whatever, avenues you can find to find this breakthrough ingredient. And then it changed and really defines the industry for, a decade or a certain period of time. So I think I was always intrigued by that. And really coaching is what allowed a bootstrap business to survive, because we didn't take any money from the company really for the first, well, really ever during that Florida period. Like it was all just bootstrapping and trying to build it. So uh, it was definitely a lot. It was a lot of juggling, a lot of hats to wear. Um, but yeah, well, I don't want to get too far off the point. So I'll let you kind of re-guide it. I think the general answer to your question though is where all of that stuff sort of intermingled was when we moved to Florida, and that move was to actually try to build out and grow De Novo Nutrition, which at that time was sort of a hybrid of a coaching service and a supplement company, with the intent to ultimately be just a supplement company. But because of those, that sort of melting pot we had with Lane, obviously, there was this interest in coaching and everything else beyond just the supplements.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because I think that is a really unique aspect to your career. And I've had a lot of things in my life that I'm not doing now, or they were stepping stones to different
Yeah.
things. Plenty of things I have redirected because of changes in the industry and the market. But as a lesson, my first supplement company, because I also created one in 1999. One of my friends was a biochemist who was doing some work in the supplement industry. And this was at a time when there was zero shelf space for these kinds of products in
Yeah.
real retailers. And you saw Metrics and EAS as the first two. And this friend of mine said, "Man, you could do this. Your background, your credibility, like you should have a company." And unfortunately, he talked me into it because I was too young, had no idea what I was getting into, knew nothing about the industry nor business at that level. So within 1 year, we're in all 50 states. We're a 7-figure company. We're in multiple countries. And we ended up as the third company in the country with retail shelf space nationally. We had a 14-state distributor who ordered a semi of product. And we're like, holy fuck, what do we do now?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're scrambling for capital, and it is the classic story of you grow too big too fast, and we just couldn't sustain that. Then I think a few years after that, you really rode the great wave of, I'm probably using this term incorrectly, but kind of a lifestyle brand where it's like, man, people loved you. They loved Ryan. They loved the personas behind the company. And so you created this cult type following, and it was pretty amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
your credibility, your science-based reasoning and writings about your products and so forth really carried the load. So just for people, because I know we have a lot of coaches who are trying to build companies as well. And I think this is very germane to that. What were the things that you did right? What were the things that you wish you would have known that you do now?
So, I mean, as much as I'd love to take credit for, I think that aspect of it, like the social momentum and orchestrating of the, how did you just define it? Like lifestyle brand type stuff. Like, I think that is one, as soon as you meet Ryan, you realize like that he emanates that. So that was very largely Ryan. I think that's why we were a very potent 1-2 punch. But I'm sorry, you need to remind me of the last question, because I was going to go way down a tangent on the answer to that.
No, that's where I want you to go. I really want people to see just what it takes to build a successful company, including the inner works. You said you
Yeah.
wore many hats. You're not taking money. You're just grinding it out. Like the successful people have that background in common. But
Yeah.
then you did some things extremely well that caught that wave. But ultimately, De Novo Nutrition is no more. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So maybe give us that whole landscape of how things happened.
Yeah. So that's right. You asked me, I think, lessons learned, like positive, and then things that I would avoid. It's funny. I think a big part is, and you hear like anybody who's watched Shark Tank, like I watch that every once in a while when it's on TV, and I've heard Mark Cuban and other well-established businessmen say you kind of got to trust your gut. And I think a lot of that stuff that built momentum in the beginning was that, like, it was just sort of gut feelings and intuition and instinct. Like I remember, and you know what's crazy, this is an important part, is that I think goes less appreciated today, is having those in-person events where you could meet, you can interact. Because I remember the dinners being a huge aspect of those VIP camps with Lane. And that's really where Ryan and I started talking and started brainstorming, and stuff just really just blossomed off of that, off of just a few conversations. So I think I'd be lying if I said there was this master plan. We did really kind of figure it out as we went, and interestingly, as it tried to get more formalized, it didn't work as well as when it was just very organic. And yeah, I think it's tough to give you any type of I think formal answer to that, because I think from my experience, it just sort of happened by being in a flow state. Like I knew what I wanted. I was working towards what I wanted, and you could argue very stubbornly, like there was no option for it not to work. But at the same time, I think just by being associated in these groups and connecting with people with the same passion, it just sort of happened. I wish I could say like I had step one this, step two that. Like it really just was following my passions and then just being connected and being out there enough in the networks that sort of, I think, made it really kind of blossom. I think the difficult aspect of business is that our problem was sort of the opposite of what it sounds like yours was, is we didn't grow too big too fast. It was very difficult to reach those milestones in growth. Like we did have breakthrough periods, but I think it always on the outside looked bigger than it really was. And when you're bootstrapping and everybody is really in the trenches working for this belief that by year 3, by year 4, it's going to pay off, and it's not happening yet at the timeline you want it to, I think at some point that emotional investment needs to convert into a financial return, and it just wasn't happening or growing fast enough, and that's just very difficult to, I think, keep together. And that was always sort of a panic of my, from my perspective as the founder of it, and why I was always hesitant in the beginning to even involve other people, is knowing that like people's lives are dependent upon this. You know, people are taking a big chunk of their productive, you know, professional lives in their 20s when they're trying to really establish themselves and believing and buying into your thing, and it's got to convert. And I think there was always this rush of it needed to convert. And I think the most difficult aspect of the supplement arm of De Novo, or the supplement arm of anything, is the margins just are not as large as like a clothing company or a coaching company. You know, coaching is really the margins are enormous. Like the overhead costs are very low relative to supplements, where like consumables, you know, at least 50% of it is getting eaten up in the production and the shipping and all of that stuff. So I think that was one of the major uphill battles. I'm trying to find again some type of real easy pinpoint lesson in that.
When did you know it was time to just let it go, and how did that happen? And I'm asking that because I want to parallel that with my story in the exact same way, because then that led to some great things. I mean, that was one of the most painful points of my professional life. I cannot remember crying this hard, and I didn't expect this. As I was having a meeting with my staff and employees and people who invested time and money in the company, and I had to tell them it's over. I still don't know if I've ever cried that hard in my life, just because that was how much we had all invested in this. And yet one of my business mentors said to me, Joe, everybody will do better and have greater opportunities because of this. Trust me. And he was exactly correct. Everything that we thought had just burned to the ground and we did not succeed were the exact stepping stones to even better things.
I would like to see it that way. I would hope that everybody else involved has seen it that way. I think that so you asked about, how it wound down. I mean, the irony to the answer to that question is, in many ways it hasn't. Like, so I do have another company. I'm still stubbornly trying to do the same thing. But it did last beyond where I think everybody, when you mention the name De Novo Nutrition, anybody who's aware of it could have multiple answers to whatever their version of knowing De Novo Nutrition was. I think a very small crowd could have been, the first 2 years when I was just running myself out of my parents' house. And then I think most people, the largest chunk of the bell curve, would know it during the Florida years, because that's really when it, grew the most, especially in terms of social recognition. And then there was a period where I moved back, and it was just me running the company. And then I partnered with somebody else in the UK, trying to expand it more internationally and into the European market. So it lasted for about 3 years, 4 years beyond that. And then it finally, kind of the death blow was COVID. And it's largely just because everything, finances, obviously, people penny pinching. So like, I know every company took a hit during that period of time, but obviously the smaller ones, I think it was more difficult. And that's ultimately what kind of just made me look at it and say, okay, at this point, this is the best exit out in terms of our ability to liquidate, pay off all of the debt we had, and sort of start over again from scratch. So it wasn't this clean, streamlined process. And I think baked into that answer of that 3 year period of leaving Florida, and then that next chapter of De Novo, it's exactly what you described. I mean, I think when I left Florida, I left a version of myself behind that felt like it died. And that was like the powerlifting competitor athlete side. That was the person that was integral in those communities. And the difficult part is, like, when you're talking about a person who's also a business owner, you look at the business, but you forget there's a person living a life too. And I think, one of the difficulties for me was like going through losing an enormous outlet for me, which was powerlifting and my ability to do it, because I was, going through some pretty serious back and disc injuries during that time, to the point where I couldn't even really lift. And it is a major factor in what drove me to leave and come back home to Florida. And obviously, once that happened, when you have a serious injury where you're in chronic pain, it affects everything. It affects you emotionally. It affects your motivation. It affects every part of you. And to lose a business during that time too, it was a pure, like, just like you said, like, I mean, I don't think I've ever cried that much for that extended of a period in my life, as far back as I can remember. And it felt like, it didn't just feel like a company was dying. It felt like a part of me was dying, because for me, De Novo came from my brain. So like, I personally identified with De Novo. So for the company to dissolve, it felt like the death of myself in many ways too. So yeah, I mean, that's really an all over the place answer to your question, but hopefully it gives people a lot of the scope of being an entrepreneur.
Well, I haven't told this story in quite a while, but you made it come back with full force, in that the day that we decided it had to be over, and sometimes I wish we hadn't. I wish we could have, we would have made the decision to fight a little longer. But I had a partner of mine who is my main financial backer. And besides some other investors, we did have some bank capital that he was primarily able to get for us. So we're talking in the tune of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And at the point where this contract fell through, and this person had kind of pulled us along, he was doing some things illegal. The way our company wound down was in a 3-year lawsuit where we had to sue a broker. This guy ended up losing his law license, his SEC license, his job, and he spent 3 years in prison. And I'd like to say, so it was all his fault, but I'm the guy who trusted him. I'm the guy who, because I was so invested in my dream, that I thought, this guy's offering to fill this role for us, so I'm going to invite him in. sight unseen. So I just recall that day that my partner and I sat in the president of a bank's office, and I should say they decided the run is over, like we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And that night, just I had to take my kids to karate class. So I had, two of my kids out there and they're little geese, 5 years old,
Which
7 years
I
old.
can't imagine having kids and adding that. I can't imagine going through, what I did with kids as well. So, man, kudos to you.
Well, that entire hour that they were in class, I just laid in the corner of this gym on the concrete floor and stared at a fan 40 feet above my head, wondering everything. How am I going to feed my kids next week? How am I going to do this? What do you do with $1 million of debt? All of these things. We had this 2 to 3 year meteoric rise that just came to a crashing halt. And as I want to emphasize, and maybe move on to some happier times in our lives, that those are the kind of things that probably teach you more lessons. I call it my $1 million MBA. And I sure wish I would have had somebody beside me to say, no, Joe, don't do that. Do this. You're not smart enough. You don't have the expertise. Bringing somebody in, you mentioned Shark Tank, to literally say, here's how you run a business. I thought because I was good at what I was good at, that would just carry the day.
Mm-hmm.
It did not. And I think there's a great lesson in that. But like my friend had told me, as painful as this is, it's going to lead you to better places. And I don't think you would know who I am if not for that company. I wouldn't have the business I have if not for that company. So painful as hell, expensive, but you don't hit a home run without a few strikeouts. And I think that's a really big part of a story that you and I share.
Yeah, I mean, despite all of what we just said, I would never have not tried. If I could relive my life again, I would 100% still go for it. I mean, I still am. So I think despite all of the hardships and the pain and like you said, failures and things that feel like personal failures, it's still worth it because they're defining moments. It's just like competing in that sense. It's like, do you not compete because you're afraid of losing, or do you find out, get answers, and move forward, better because of it?
So what are you doing now? Ironically, I also still have a core supplement line. It's very much more internal. One lesson I learned is that you can't play both sides of the field in terms of being kind of direct access to customers with a higher profit margin and try and get shelf space and just, prostitute your margins. So I decided, okay, that part is over. I have a distribution network. I have my client base. I have my company. So I will keep the products that I love and am attached to because of their nutritional value. So just our protein powder at this point, and just utilize that for what I wanted it for the beginning, which is just having the highest quality, best products you could have. And it's not going to be the main force of my company, but it's just something that still adds some value because I have that expertise in my background. And so it does, as you said, live on just in a different form. So I'm very interested to hear what you're doing with yours.
Yeah. So I appreciate you, through your experience, actually giving me the answer to now the question you asked prior, which is like one of the lessons or things that I've learned. And I think it's that as well for me, which is that, does it have to be world famous? Does it have to be on the shelves of a Walmart or, a top seller on Amazon? And I think by looking at things and realizing, like, you have to define what success is for you. And I think at that young age, that's what I thought it was. And I think really now when I look at it, like the fact that I can still make an income and live a life formulating products that don't need to be top sellers because there are these niche markets. I think that is really what I would define now as success. I am afraid all the time that it's not gonna, the next year it's not gonna be there. But I think that is what I've wanted, because I do truly, truly love, as much as I love the science of nutrition and body comp and powerlifting, I love formulating. I love the chase of finding a new thing. So there's sort of multiple answers wrapped up in that. So that's the one thing I learned is I think it doesn't necessarily need to be this blockbuster success to actually be success. I think, you need, success is, you really need to define what that is for yourself. Otherwise you're chasing what everybody else's definition of. And I think I found that that might not actually be my definition of it. That's what I thought my definition of it was. It was like the manufactured idea of success. But as to what I'm doing now, I have another supplement company called Elemental Formulations. That really is, even as the name implies, like, it's the love for chemistry and formulation is sort of baked into that, and it's just the purest form of what I think did work for De Novo in terms of formulas and products. So we did take our most popular, which was Utopia. That's a product now under the Elemental line, and it's really just a lot less marketing. It's sort of the products for the purists, and it does make the journey harder, but I find it, for me, it's that much more rewarding when someone finds it. Just like someone asking me to be on the podcast is like, I've heard numerous people say, you fly under the radar about me, but it makes me feel good when someone does find me, because I think one of the things that is meaningful to me is that I can, and you mentioned this as well, thinking that a company can be successful just by being really good at something. I think I'm sort of an idealist, and I also am someone who believes in, like, utilitarianism. And it just feels good that someone found me, not because somebody else said I'm amazing. I'd like to think it's because they found me from some type of product or my work or something. Because I think that is one of the things, like, I will always be grateful to Lane by giving me a platform and giving, me notoriety. But at the same time, a lot of that success that was associated with him felt like I didn't necessarily earn it. It felt like it was just people God Lane, so they're godding me by association, and that felt fabricated, and I wasn't proud of that success, if that makes sense. So anyway, the short answer, now that I gave you the long one, is I have Elemental, and then I still do some coaching on the side with a different company. I'm no longer doing it as an independent coach because I realized too many hats to wear. So I work for a company called The Strength Guys, and I basically do programming and some nutrition just with them, because then I don't need to be responsible for both companies. I can be responsible for what I need to be responsible with Elemental, and then I could just coach, not have to wear all the hats of owning a business with The Strength Guys.
Excellent. I teach a lot of coaches. I mentor, certify licensed coaches, and one of the core principles that I discuss is minimum viable audience. So too many people think they are going to be the next, international coach of fame. And that's probably not going to happen. I mean, if you're just looking statistically, but also I don't think that's how you get there, is by shooting for that. First, you start out by being so good at what you do that you're sought after. In our local market, I tried to kind of restart under the radar. We moved our national office to San Diego for a few years, and then split it between there and Nashville, and then COVID hit, and I was just trying to decide what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, let's just kind of reopen here in Evansville after a 15-year or so hiatus. And so I just kind of non-discreetly opened up this little space on Main Street, and people just start flocking because they see the name. And it does feel a little bit like Fight Club. Like I'm doing everything to not be found, and people are still finding the red door.
Yeah.
And there is that's almost the best way to create that mystique in a brand. And that's a real concept, minimum viable audience. You don't want everybody. You want the people who are just so die hard in love with you and your service that they would never leave you.
Yeah.
Such a lesson in that. And I feel like both of you and I probably kind of found that, circuitously.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think my route to finding it is really a sustainability thing. I think one of the things that was amazing to be able to watch, being around all of these, what I consider now would be defined as the forefathers of fitness or fitness coaching. I think I got to see success take as many different forms, and people gain an audience through many different ways. And I was able to look at, okay, how do they do it? like, would that be sustainable for me? Would that make me happy? Would that be fulfilling for me? And I think a lot of times, like what I found was the biggest people, I wouldn't be able to sustain that. I don't have that type of energy. I don't have that type of tank. Honestly, I don't like that much attention. I think I had to find ways that were workable for me. And that's still a process for me. I think I'm still finding that, but I think life is also teaching me. I'm trying to be better at not ignoring, when I get super burnt out. Like, there's a lesson packaged in that, and I need to be able to be humble enough to, I think, take it in. But I think many of those prior versions as well, most people will look at it and say, like, why did you not embrace the spotlight when you had it? Why didn't you go full bore? Why didn't you go all in? And I think people think it was like this strategic thing on my part, but it was really that, like, it wasn't enjoyable for me. It was killing me on the inside. So I just needed to find ways that, like, were livable for me. And funny enough that you said, you moved back to hometown. Like, I'm back hometown, and one of the things that brought me back home was, not just the injury, but like my brother adopting, and both of my parents being diagnosed with different forms of cancer, and things that were just like, okay, like, you're out here, you're trying to build a business. These are the things that you want, and it seems like you should want, but there's also this life stuff happening that you can't ignore back home, that it may not be there forever if you choose this one or the other. And it was emotionally difficult, but at the same time, I don't regret any of the things that I did. And at the same, and I also, again, like you said, I learned a lot of lessons within that, and I think found my answers to things, which is hard. It's not easy, but those painful processes are important to go through.
You're reading my biography in all of the introversion speak, and the fact that, when I created a lot of the processes and just, almost accidentally created nutrition coaching as a thing, there was a lot asked of me in terms of speaking engagements and being out front. And there's a certain degree of that I'm okay with, but I'm not an aggressive extrovert where I'm going to create that myself. I don't have that high of ego needs, and yeah. I much prefer to be alone and behind the scenes. I'm a very good wingman. Like, I can push other people out front and help them be, very successful, but I just want to be the guy in the back spinning the dials and flipping the switches. So as the industry asked of me some of those same things, like, Joe, take charge, get out there, do more. There's so much of the pie that you're not getting. And I'm like, I just finally had to realize I don't want it. That's not what revs me up. That's not what I want my career to be like. I still want to work with individuals, and whether it's mentoring a coach or working with a literal client in my own facility, like I did 25 years ago, nothing brings me more joy than that. So why would I want to seek those things that I don't really like just because they're out there?
Yeah, well, you touched on a really interesting aspect too for me in coming back to coaching, because I did take a break for a while during that COVID time where I had to pick one, and I chose to try to keep the supplement thing alive. And then now more recently I've come back, and I think I realized in coming back that one of the things that was feeling empty about the supplement side and just purely doing that was I wasn't getting that individualized sense of making a difference, or an impact in somebody's life. Like, yeah, it's cool when someone says, like, I was using medication and I'm not now because your supplement, satisfies all these things. Like, that's great. But so much of it is, like, 90% of it is the complaints, the customer service things that you're dealing with, and seeing just a lot of negative. And man, when most of what you're getting is negative, even if you have a business that's self-sustaining, if you're just seeing negative feedback, that's part of your headspace. So to come back and just hear people say, like, have breakthroughs with either believing in their ability to do things that they didn't think of before, or hitting strength milestones or physique milestones, like, I needed that too. To know that I'm making a difference, a positive impact on a personal level, because you just don't get as much of it when you're doing something at scale. So I think balance is a big theme of this discussion. And anytime I've tried to go too far in on one thing, I started drowning. And ironically, what it's true of as well is, like, during that time, one of the things I didn't mention, while I was losing the athletic Ben, the powerlifting bodybuilding competition competitor Ben, and the company, I decided to go back for another degree, and I went into this pure science thing. And I think it forced me to get completely isolated in a way that I felt like I'm purely pursuing the thing I want, which is, a deeper understanding of biochemistry and pharmacology. But man, like, that took me for a ride as well, when like it was all classwork and assignments and textbooks that were just pure objective science. Like, I needed a rebalancing. And I think, the 3-4 years of that have taken sort of another 3-4 years of not being in that to sort of even back out. And I think I'm still kind of trying to find, an even ground of tapping back into social life as well. Because man, it's hard for one brain to be doing all of those things and do them efficiently. Like, I found that, even, it's funny because we used to talk about this and joke about it in Florida, is like, I found that like I almost felt like part of my brain was atrophying in Florida, because like I would be so hard-headed and heart set on trying to find the next breakthrough ingredient or the next utopia to sustain us product wise. Like, I would just be locked in reading papers or reading journals and stuff, and I just wasn't talking to anybody. And it's amazing, like, we are very adaptive. Muscle is very adaptive to load and stimulus, but we forget that our brain, neuroplasticity is a thing too, and your brain adapts if you remove something completely. So yeah, it's all of it is just such an interesting journey in sort of self-reflection.
And that's what led me to the second half of my career. So I had my first half, which were all the physical and objective sciences. I actually want to talk about your injury because I started out in orthopedic physical therapy, but now a master's degree in social science, another in social science writing, another in social psychology. So, as soon as I turned 40 and now into my 50s, like, that has consumed my academic and personal brain. There's direct carryover into what I do as a business owner and a coach and an entrepreneur. But at the same time, instead of just seeing all of the hard sciences, I've awakened to the humanities side, and like, wow, speaking about atrophy, like, this part of my brain just didn't even exist until it was awakened through that. Right. But yeah, tell me, I knew you had gotten injured, and I knew it was a back injury. What was that injury? Surgeries, rehab? Where are you now?
So the original injuries were herniations that I used to just loosely define as like a back strain or something, and I had no idea that I was bulging discs. And of course, stubbornness is the theme of this conversation as well. And I think there are numerous aspects that would be sort of distracting to get down into the rabbit holes of why. I think the abbreviated answer is I had multiple level herniations, mostly in my lumbar. They were happening throughout my powerlifting, but mostly during where I was kind of crossing over from bodybuilding, competing and doing contest prep, but also powerlifting and training for powerlifting meets. And I would have these spasms where I would train through them because I was in prep and I didn't want to lose that caloric expenditure. And I remember at one point, like, I was double belting. I had a Tommy Kono belt, and then I put an Inzer belt, like a lever belt, on top of it to get through my training sessions. Not the smartest thing, not something I'd ever recommend to somebody else, but I justified it to myself. And I just remember I had trained that day doing that. I recorded a podcast. I didn't really have pain. And then I went back upstairs to listen to it. I went to get out of a chair and I just collapsed. And this was really the major event for me. I didn't even realize it at the time. I just remember laying down because I couldn't even go, like, get up myself to go to sleep. My parents had to pick me up. They had to drop a mattress. We had to call an ambulance the next day because I still couldn't stand up. And I just remember laying down thinking, like, my life's going to be different after this. Now, the irony is, like, a week later after that, I had bounced back really quick. I was able to get back to training. This was actually before I even met you at the VIP camps. So you never would have known, but I think the thing about injuries, especially when you're talking about like ligaments or tendons or bone, is, you know, you're talking about a lifespan. So stuff in your 20s that you don't think could be accruing this mechanical or structural change, you kind of realize later. And I think what I didn't realize is, as I kept doing more powerlifting, more competition, I started getting this nagging, you know, back thing that felt like my SI joint, but running down my right leg and my butt. And I went on this journey to try to figure out what it was, kept trying to train through it until the point where it started becoming incapacitating. It wasn't going away. I had to stop training. I got imaging. I did so many things. I got stem cells in my bottom 3 discs. I did epidural injections. I did PT. I flew and saw Stu McGill in Canada, who's like one of the leading spine experts. I never actually had surgery because everywhere I went, everybody recommended against that. Like, don't let anybody cut into your back, no fusions, none of that. So I never did that. Through this long road of trying to figure out answers, I had found that initial injury that I told you about was actually missed. Like, it was misread. The imaging was misread. And when Stu McGill was going over it with me, he said, oh, wow, like you have an annular tear here in L5S1, you fracture between 4 and 5. So I had a lot going on. I had the multi-level herniation, the annular tear, and then the fracture, that I think it just took accrued over time, you know, more repeated injuries to really rear its ugly head. So basically what happened was COVID, ironically, where I talked about all the negative things business-wise, it was a very positive thing because gyms shut down. I wasn't able to train the way that I was prior. It made me rest a lot more. And my back started feeling a lot better. I stopped doing the power lifts. I stopped doing compressive stuff, and it got more manageable to the point where, like, now I can lift, but I think lifting to me is a whole different thing than it used to be. I don't train nearly like I was. I just accepted that I'm not going to be a competitive powerlifter anymore. It's just not the sustainable path. And crazy enough, and this could really segue, but I found golf, and golf is like my new passion, because swinging a club, believe it or not, for whatever reason, that rotation motion must decompress my spine just in a way that on that side, I don't know if it's just where the bulge or the tear is that it actually decompresses it that way, but it actually kind of gave me relief and it made me feel athletic again. So like during COVID, I dove full bore into golf, and now like I'm doing pro-ams, I'm competing in golf now. So
From
I still
powerlifting
lift.
to golf.
Yeah, no one would have ever, everybody who I say that to is like, I never would have seen you doing that, but I find joy in that. I just think it's funny because neither would I. But yeah, I still lift though. I think it's now a more manageable way of doing lifting. So yeah, really a total 180 turn, but the back stuff is much better. And as I mentioned before, I realized what kind of cloud I had over me while I was in chronic pain that is not there anymore. But just like we talked about the brain adapting to, you know, social things and other stuff, I think your brain adapts to chronic pain. And that's something that does sort of live with you, that you need to retrain as well. That like, okay, I'm not in pain anymore. And like, it's weird. Like, I was never an anxious, super high strung person, but chronic pain definitely created a more anxious version of me that now I also need to, I have had to work on, I think is a better way of saying it. So yeah, a lot of life lessons through both business and powerlifting and all of this stuff.
So I'm glad I asked. I definitely want to discuss some of this with you off camera, because as an orthopedic physical therapist who incidentally is going to be scheduled for surgery for my neck
Oh boy.
in the next few weeks, with a space occupying lesion like a disc herniation or tear, and you know, perhaps a ligamentous tear in the spine. You even said maybe a fracture that you didn't even know you had.
Yep.
those are kind of things that will revisit you as degeneration happens. So my
Sure.
original herniation was from car accidents, motorcycle accidents. I actually not only have the herniated disc at C5-6, but there are three longitudinal ligament tears, the ligamen flavum, I believe. So my neurosurgeon said, like, you really did a number. Like either you, like, you could have been a quadriplegic because you tore that ligament either three spaces in the same injury or just three different injuries. Nonetheless, from that in my childhood, obviously the disc is just going to gradually degenerate without that nucleus. And so, 25, 30 years later, here I am having that. So,
Yep.
let's close out with all of these incredible life lessons that we both paralleled, and talk about the future. So you're still doing some coaching, both performance, biomechanical type work, and probably holistically, including nutrition and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
You've got this supplement company, and I definitely want to hear more about that as we close. But where you were part of that second wave of nutrition coaching as an occupation or a career force, back in those Florida days, how do you view it now when you look at the landscape as a registered dietitian, looking at what's happening and some of those laws, of course, being ignored and some just softened? I mean, even my state of Indiana, they've just basically kind of given up and said, okay, as long as you're not doing medical nutrition therapy, whatever, just don't hurt anybody.
Yep.
How do you perceive where we're going, and where would you like to see it go?
I wish I could say it was 100% positive. I mean, I think like everybody, probably my generation and older, I do worry about what the social media addictions have done, and will be doing to the younger generations. I think they've changed the landscape of everything, not just our internal landscape, but also I think, so much more people getting into entrepreneurship. So everybody's selling something. So I think it's taken those things prior, like you said, about, nutrition services and coaching and stuff like that, and it's actually leveled it up now, where before you might see in, just your local gym, the personal trainers or whatever doing nutrition advice, and now it's really anybody with a platform, with a phone, a cell phone, and an Instagram account. So I think the difficulty is, even if they pass those laws, how the heck are they going to enforce all of that? I don't think that's the solution. I just hope that logic doesn't disappear. And that's one of my other concerns about the social media stuff, is we've seen with political campaigns and everything, is like the belief wars and the, fake news and all that stuff. It's moving things in a direction that I don't know is valuing logic, or evidence as much. I like to think that things go in this sort of cyclical wave-like fashion, and at some point something will come along and bring us more towards that. But the fact that we're here and talking about it and there's still a platform shows that there's certainly enough of an audience that values this stuff, that we need to stay strong and keep fighting for it. So yeah, I think as long as that continues, what is the benefit for us though is there will be an importance for people like us that value that and are providing that type of information. So I think it actually keeps me engaged in the fight, so to speak, just in my own sustainable way. Whereas I think we have the lanes of the world who are very at the forefront with the megaphone, confronting it very vocally. And then for me, I try to put that into products or concepts or ideas or my own flavor of doing it. But I think in many ways we're all kind of trying to fight that same fight.
Well, and I do believe you're right on the positive side, in that there is a bit of a natural selection catabolic curve, in that
Yeah.
people who do take the time to get the education, the credibility, and they build something that is sustainable, they will survive, and others will have to move on. But one more time before we go, tell me where people can find your supplement line.
So it's elemental.fit. That will redirect you. The other way to get there is eformulations.co. The company is Elemental Formulations. You can find me on Instagram. I'm not super duper active. And then I have another side passion project called Subsci, which is a page where I'm trying to do that same thing that I just talked about, in terms of building some type of curriculum to better understand supplements and kind of break them down, because I still think there's a massive gap there. Whereas, a lot of the things we talked about today, or the people we talked about, have made a lot of progress and inroads to understanding of nutrition, or physique, body comp changes. I still think there's a lot of progress to be made in terms of the balance between the marketing of supplements and actually understanding them and being able to, constructively criticize or critique them. So, yeah, I that's a passion project, but man, again, we talk about only having so much time. So I hope I could build it out a little better in as time moves forward, but there's always so many pots that need to be filled at the same time.
Well, I love that you're still doing it. I mean, this is what attracted me to your work in the first place, and to know that this is still what's driving you forward, along with golf. It's just great to see, and we'll put all that information in the show notes, of course. But Ben Esgro, man, long time coming. So great to catch up, and I hope to see you again soon.
Likewise, thank you for having me.